Wake up.
Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer. Monsanto is currently facing more than 3,500 individual plaintiffs in lawsuits over health problems that arose from their blockbuster weed killer Roundup. Glyphosate, the main ingredient in Roundup, has been linked to scores of health problems, including cancers and neurological issues, among many others. And now the company's finally heading to court to defend themselves against a mountain of scientific research telling us how dangerous Roundup really is. Tonight, we'll give you the latest developments of the litigation against Monsanto and explain the most recent science that Monsanto doesn't want you to know about. Then later in the show, I'll talk to you about a heated water war between major beer corporations and local residents of Mexicali. So don't go anywhere. America's Lawyer starts now.
This is a classic whistleblower case within the pharmaceutical industry. Fraud. Democracy is convinced by this company was what you're doing is wrong.
Monsanto will make more than $2 billion this year from the sales of Roundup. Their blockbuster weed killer has been the most popular herbicide on the planet and has brought the company billions upon billions of dollars in profits ever since it was first introduced. So it should come as no surprise that the company's doing everything they can to convince people around the world that their cash cow is perfectly safe. But the claims being made by the company about Roundup safety don't fit in with what science is telling us. Independent scientific studies have linked exposure to glyphosate a variety of different illnesses, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, brain cancer, breast cancer, and kidney disease, just to name a few. And all the while, Monsanto has been telling consumers that their product is safe enough to drink straight out of the bottle, though executives have repeatedly refused to demonstrate this when being asked by reporters. As lawsuits against the company keep growing, Monsanto is now going to have to take their tired and weak defenses to the courtroom, where juries will be soon deciding whether or not consumers can hold the company liable for the diseases that science is blaming on this corrupt company. Joining me to talk about this is Carol Moore, probably one of the country's most aggressive legal investigators working on this Monsanto case. Carol, Roundup, they're finding it in beer, in wine. That's the latest story that's coming out, where they're doing testing and the residue of Roundup is being found in the wine that we think is safe or the beer that we think is safe. What are you finding in your investigation?
Well, interesting enough, they found it in Gallo, Mondavi, Barefoot, Sutter Home Wine, Yellowtail, all these popular wines that we Americans enjoy. And they're finding it at parts per billion that would cause illnesses, such as breast cancer. And then they found it in beer. You know, beer is one of the most popular American alcoholic drinks we have, and they found it in beer. And so it's rather alarming, and I would think American consumers would be alarmed.
Yeah, well, here's the problem. People don't understand what it means when you find Roundup residue in the beer that you're drinking or the wine that you're drinking. This is across the board. You could go down the list. Probably the beer that you're drinking, the wine that you're drinking now, has residue of Roundup. Now, here's the point. Add that to this. They're finding 23 parts per billion of Roundup in the wine. Some of the most popular wines, 23 parts per billion of that toxin in the wine. Now, the studies show that it only takes 1 part per trillion to cause cellular changes where it comes to breast cancer. I mean, the science is clear on it. We're talking about 1 part per trillion that can actually affect cell division, which leads to some of the breast cancer problems that they're finding related to this particular toxin. What's your take?
You know, and I'm shocked about the wine and disappointed to see that, but then got a really big surprise also this week when we learned that they had detected it in infant formula, soybean infant baby formula at 170 parts per billion. And they have no idea how children are going to react to this, what diseases it may cause. But we do know childhood diseases are on the rise. Birth defects are on the rise.
Carol, how long have they had this information? You've been probably one of the chief investigators looking at this. When did they start learning, A, that Roundup has the ability to cause cancer, and B, when did they start learning that this is a residue from Roundup that can be found in baby formula, as you point out, the food we eat? In a minute, I want to talk to you about the list of foods that we eat every day and talk about how much Roundup, glyphosate, is found in those products. But when did all this really start developing? As you've investigated this, what is that time where they knew something's wrong here?
Clearly in the 80s, there were studies that showed that it would cause tumors in rats and mice. And then, more importantly than in the 90s, they would see tumors of different locations in the bodies. And that's a clear sign, that's a precautionary principle sign that said, you got to tell people this. And then Hardell found the link to non-Hodgkin lymphoma in the 90s. So it's been out there for several decades now.
Well, you mentioned the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is about, if I understand it correctly, you may not have all of the information. You might even have two studies that disagree with each other. One study says clearly cancer, one study says maybe cancer. But the requirement for the company is to give the consumer a choice. Say to the consumer, I'm going to disclose what we found. We found cancer in monkeys. We found cancer in rats. These studies are also showing things like Parkinson's disease. They're showing things like with children. They're trying a whole host of different cancers with children. There are studies that vary. One study may show this. Another study may not be as strong as that. But under the precautionary principle, as you point out, the responsibility of the company is to let people know that and then let them make the decision as to whether or not they want to use this product. Isn't that kind of what that's about?
That's absolutely what this is about. And it's telling the mothers of these children that are put on soy-based infant meal, this has a Roundup residue in it, and you have to know to make the choice. Not on the label, and Roundup, Monsanto's not telling you, you can't make the choice.
Well, the World Health Organization came out with a study that was very clear. They came out and they said, we're not guessing here. The World Health Organization made the statement that we want to tell you that there's a probable relationship between Roundup and cancer. Okay, so that's behind us. Tell us a little bit about how important that study, who was involved, and how serious that study was that right now Monsanto seems to totally want to distance themselves from. What was your take on that study?
There were 17 scientists that made that study and came together from 10 different countries across the world. They had no political agenda. They were world-renowned, very respected scientists, and they came up with that conclusion. And then after that, 94 other scientists from 27 countries came out in full support of this decision that Roundup is a probable carcinogen.
What have you seen as you've done this investigation when the World Health Organization comes up? For example, 17 scientists around the world, they don't have any agenda. You know, they're not working for any entity that's in competition with Monsanto. 17 scientists from all over the world say, yeah, this will cause cancer. Then, as you point out, 92 or 94 scientists come out and say, we agree with that. What is Monsanto doing here? What are they doing to try to discredit these scientists? What kind of steps have you seen them taking?
Well, they've been across the board. They took this right at these people. They went right at these people. They tried to subpoena. They tried to contact them personally. They've been going to the EPA, telling the EPA, you got to stop this. They've gone to every legislation in the United States and across the world saying, we've got to shut this down. They have had their own study written by their own team that is totally written by Monsanto, but they put it out as it was written by other experts. So they've done everything they can to suppress the truth from the consumers of the world.
Well, what I think is interesting, Carol, is when some of the material that you're finding that you've shared with me is that I don't think there's been a study that's come out where independent scientists, they have no dog in the fight, They're from, as we pointed out, from all over the world that come out and say, you know what, we think it causes Parkinson's disease, we think it causes childhood cancer, we think it causes leukemia, we think it causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. If I were to take those 4 studies, for example, every one of those studies were attacked, not just mildly attacked, but the people who actually wrote the stories were victimized by the company. The company would go after them in the university that they worked, in the laboratory that they worked. They'd put political pressure on those scientists who said that. As a matter of fact, maybe, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but right now the World Health Organization is under attack to where they're going to lose their funding from the United States because Monsanto has such political influence that they're getting congressmen and senators to say, let's not fund the World Health Organization because they've now said that Roundup will cause cancer. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. We've seen documents that were written directly to members of Congress of the United States saying, we don't want this organization funded any longer. And they're writing those letters every day to try and shut this down so that consumers won't know the truth and won't be able to make that important choice.
You have some cities and counties around the country that are banning the use of Roundup. Tell us, give us a thumbnail sketch of how active that's becoming, where the city or the state says you can't even use this stuff in our city. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think one of the most important one that we need to look at is the city of New York has banned the use of Roundup in any public right-of-way, and specifically in childhood playgrounds. It's terrible because we know that Roundup has a ability to be absorbed dermally through the arms or face or legs of these children. So the New York City just said, we're not using this anymore. We'll follow an alternative. So they no longer use Roundup, and they've done that. They passed that resolution in 2015. They passed it in 2016. And we've seen other countries like the Netherlands say, no more Roundup for us. So that's a position that a lot of other states should take and pattern our behavior after those same countries and states that are doing that.
Yeah. I talked about food studies that have shown Roundup's becoming increasingly common in foods. Give us a rundown, just basically what those numbers look like. Parts per billion when they're finding glyphosate Roundup in the actual food we eat. Give us kind of a rundown.
It's interesting, a lot of new mothers feed their children Cheerios, and Cheerios has been tested for the residue of Roundup at 1,120 parts per billion. And then you've got things like Oreos. Everybody loves Oreo cookies, 400 parts per billion. Little Cheez-It crackers, these are things that you think might be healthy for your children, and yet we don't know that they have this residue.
Right, right. Well, here's the point. You're giving numbers like that, but it's only 1 part per trillion, 1 part per trillion that has the ability to cause human disease. Carol, thank you for joining. We'll stay on this story.
Thank you.
Coming up, Mexicali residents are resisting the efforts of a big beer corporation that's aiming to strip away their water rights, and that's next, so stay tuned.
What'd you have for breakfast yesterday? Why would you pick those shoes? How fast is your Wi-Fi? What's your dog's name? Why'd you name him that? What's your biggest fear in life? Ever been on a hayride? When's the last time you read a book? What would you say if you ever met the Pope? Who's the best quarterback of all time? What's one topping that doesn't belong on a pizza? Now I've interviewed you too. Question more.
Mexicali residents are engaged in a water war against big beer corporations, Constellation brands. Residents say their district is suffering from water scarcity and giving up their water rights to the company to make beer exclusively for American consumers will only make things worse. Joining me to talk about this is RT correspondent Anya Parapel. Anya, let me ask this. What is Constellation's brand and what do they market in America?
Hi, Mike. Well, Constellation Brands is a major Fortune 500 company which markets beer, wine, and spirits and produces that in the United States. Viewers will probably recognize their beer brands most readily: Corona, Modelo Especial, Negra Especial, and also Ballast Point they recently purchased in order to kind of break into the craft beer market. These beers make them the largest beer import company in the United States. And in addition, as I said, they also produce wine and spirits such as Vodka vodka.
Anya, give us an idea of what the water situation is in that part of Mexicali. How bad is it? We know about the droughts, but how bad is it? How bad's it become?
Sure, Mike, it's pretty bad. And first, let's understand where Mexicali is. It's the capital of the state of Baja in northern Mexico, and residents' access to water is already quite bleak. This is a very dry and hot part of the continent. Temperatures in Mexicali reached 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's almost no rainfall. They get about 3.1 inches of rain a year, which, just to give you an idea, even compared with a city like Los Angeles, which we consider fairly dry in the United States, they get about 15 inches. So as a result of all of this, residents in Baja have very little access to water. The government says about 300,000 people there have no access to water. 6% have no access to running water. And keep in mind, this is just for regular household chores, cleaning, gardening, that kind of thing, because the tap water in Mexico is already unsafe to drink, and people there have to depend on private corporations to buy their money or local governments. And now that's why they're saying this deal with Constellation will only make their situation worse, considering the National Water Authority, Conagua, already estimates 37.5% of the country's aquifers are overexploited.
You know, Anya, it looks like a big water grab all over. The biggest corporations in the country are, Nestle's, for example, is just going all over the planet, taking people's drinking aquifer. And they're denying that it's going on, but it is happening. They're pumping places, California, where there's droughts going on, Flint, Michigan, where the water is already destroyed. They're traveling all over the globe, buying up some of the biggest aquifers in the world. And so we've done stories on this, but it seems like almost the American public looks at it, and it's almost like a yawn moment, like it doesn't really affect me. It does affect you, because they're trying to privatize the very water that you should have access to as a matter of right. Look, has Constellation made any public comments regarding the complaints of local residents? What's the position of Constellation? What are they saying here?
Well, NPR asked them exactly about this very issue, and this was the response Constellation came up with. They said, a company like Constellation Brands is managed with international standards in terms of high ethics and values. Constellation Brands has been in the U.S. for more than 70 years, and for a company to have that kind of permanence, it has to be managed with high national and international standards of ethics and values and the care of the environment and natural resources. It's implicit. Now, Mike, you probably know better than anyone else that that's not the case. Just because a company or a corporation is successful or has been around for a long time doesn't mean they're operating in an ethical or, for that matter, legal way.
Well, one thing corporations do, and we see it with all the major corporations. I see it all the time when we're getting ready to go to trial. For example, as a matter of fact, I'll be starting a trial against Monsanto in the very near future, and what we'll see is Monsanto coming into the place that we're doing, where that case is going to be tried, and talking about all these feel-good ads, like we're part of your community, we paid for this softball team, we do all these wonderful things, and they will spend millions telling that lie, making people understand something where they drive the conversation, and they have you ignore the real conversation, which is, in that case, Monsanto's making a product that's killing people. In this situation, Constellation Brand is stealing water that's vital to these people to be able to stay alive. So all of this feel-good PR stuff has been well-focused and thought out for a long time. Look, activists say that there are government officials who were working at Constellation Brands with them to try to accomplish this, to try to steal water, and they're working in that professional capacity. Is there any proof of this? Do we know that we actually have these corporate officials that are part of the big theft here?
Well, there is great evidence, and we do know their names. I'll get to that in a second, Mike. First, I just want to explain to viewers how we got into this situation, and that really started with the establishment of NAFTA in 1994. Then we had many industries run south of the border to get cheap labor and resources, and it turns out the beer industry was no exception. So as a result of NAFTA, Mexico actually became the #1 exporter of beer in the world, and activists will say this transformed many local governments into an extension of corporations when it comes to the issue of who these people actually represent. For example, NPR reports the legal representative for Constellation Brands, Sergio Eduardo Montes Montoya, also works in the mayor's office as the director of urban administration. Senator Victor Hermosillo Caleda's company, Hermosillo and Associates, is leading the construction of the multi-billion-dollar brewery and speaks openly about his political business dealings. Additionally, Mike, the governor of Baja, Francisco Vega, actually introduced a bill which would have given private corporations access to the state's water supply and allow them to tap into it. And due to public outrage and protest, this bill was walked back. But as we're seeing now, they didn't need legislation like that to go in and say, well, we're going to go open up a brewery and tap your water resources. So it certainly does give people a cause to say, you know, there might be some corruption in the high level of government if people working in the city also are working for a Constellation.
Right. And we'd like to think that that only happens in third world countries. It happens here in the United States. And as a matter of fact, we are the leader of in the United States of having that revolving door, of having regulators actually working for major corporations. So it's not just Mexico, it's not just third world countries that have this problem. It's in a very big way right here in the United States. Anya, thank you for joining me. The digital bank Coinbase has agreed to hand over tax information on 13,000 accounts to the IRS. IRS says their focus is on Coinbase users who bought or sold more than $20,000 worth of digital currency. Coinbase, on the other hand, argued in court that the IRS made a request that was unwarranted against their customers and that the industry as a whole has been victimized by all this. Joining me to talk about this is Molly Barrows, legal journalist for the Trial Lawyer magazine. Molly, why does the IRS suspect there's something going on with Coinbase kind of economy?
Yeah, so it's a virtual bank of sorts. It's one of the biggest in the world. Within a short amount of time, starting in 2011, after they were founded, you know, you can make money off of trading these virtual currencies, whether it's Bitcoin or something else. And so within a short amount of time, millions of accounts, millions of users. And in 2014, the federal government said, well, hey, this money that you're making off of trading Bitcoin and other currencies, that's technically property and you should pay capital gains on it. But because it's virtual, but because they use like wallets, essentially as an account holder, if you were Mike Papantonio and you wanted to start trading Bitcoin, it would be called a wallet. So in order to find out how much you're actually making off of this, they had to request from Coinbase your wallet that's got all your identifying information. So they were like, you got all these millions of customers. We want to know how much money they're making. It's a little hard to manage because it's not a federally regulated banking system, so they can't. It's easier to maybe evade taxes or do something nefarious. So
well, it's not,
you're supposed to report it.
It's not supported by really. It's not supported by anything. If you know, it's an interesting thing. If you ask most people that are in this Bitcoin business, how do I buy a pair of shoes? You know, how do I use them? I got my Bitcoins.
Yes.
How to go buy? There is a way to do it. That's not what I want to cover here, though. Look, the IRS. I'm so interested that the IRS has this interest. What is the scope of what the IRS is asking for? I mean, why is it so unusual that they should ask, are you making money on it? Because it is property, isn't it?
Right. That's exactly what it is. So they want to know if you're making money off of it. Because it's a virtual platform, you can easily get away with not self-reporting or not reporting it. So that's why they wanted to see the data. But they literally have millions of users. I mean, you're talking upwards of 10 million even recently. So when they first requested in 2014 for this information, they said, we want nearly all of your account holders' information. So you're talking millions of customers. in accounts, and Coinbase was like, oh no, back it up. We're taking you to court. We're going to fight this. And so actually it was after the court heard it that there was a compromise of sorts, and IRS was forced to narrow down the scope of the request significantly to just 13,000 account holders. And it was basically they wanted everybody, every single account that Coinbase had over a several-year period, and it was boiled down to about 13,000 between 2013 and 15, and they made 20 grand or so.
Seems like it's such a mystery that probably we ought to know. The IRS probably should have more information.
Yes, and what I did find interesting, it's a virtual banking system. Their goal is to basically make this throughout the world so you're not accountable to any one country or currency, and nobody has a monopoly. But it does sound a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, doesn't it?
Molly Bears, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Pat.
And finally tonight, some good news. U.S. federal authorities arrested the CEO of a Canadian communications company for supplying encrypted cell phones to criminal organizations, including the Mexican cartel formerly headed by El Chapo. Vincent Ramos, founder of Phantom Security, was arrested while in Seattle, Washington. A heavily redacted complaint filed by the FBI says Ramos's company supplied about 20,000 encrypted BlackBerry cell phones to Mexico's cartels and Australian biker gangs. They say Phantom devices were specifically designed to prevent law enforcement from intercepting communications from their network. Phantom advertises their technicians are able to do this by stripping BlackBerries of their hardware and software and installing their own technology. The company charges up to $3,000 for 6 months' worth of service and only allows sales to customers recommended by existing Phantom users. The FBI also found that they only deal with customers anonymously, finding nicknames such as Narco, El Chapo, and Kneecapper in Phantom's list of customers. This is a major bust, and no doubt federal authorities are celebrating this arrest. But while they do so, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are HSBC bank executives in New York who also deserve to be handcuffed, like Ramos. This is a bank that admitted to laundering money from Mexican drug cartels, which probably helped some of those gangs make timely service payments to Phantom Security. Hopefully, the Department of Justice will reconsider their approach to HSBC in light of Ramos's address. Aiding drug cartels is a huge crime, and there's really no reason why these bank executives shouldn't be in a prison cell right along with Phantom Security. That's all for tonight. Be sure to check out our website at al.law, where you can talk with an attorney about any of the stories we cover on the show. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/RT America's Lawyer. You can watch all RT America programs on DirecTV on channel 321. I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer, where every week we tell you stories that corporate media is ordered not to tell because their advertisers won't let them. Have a great night.